The sun had already dipped beneath the ragged edge of the distant buttes by the time Claire Morgan zipped her old green tent closed and stood, alone, in the middle of the Arizona grasslands. The sky above her was a violet-blue canvas, flecked with the first cold stars of evening, and the breeze that rippled through the sea of grass was scented with mesquite and something else, an unnameable wildness that prickled the skin at the back of her neck. She hugged her arms around herself, feeling the rough seam of her jacket pressing into her forearms, and listened as the hush of twilight deepened all around her. She was 58, a widow, and a wildlife photographer whose best work, some said, was behind her. The last photograph of her late husband, Mark, smiled from inside her battered wallet, his eyes forever fixed on a sunrise they'd shared on a mountaintop in Utah. Tonight, she was supposed to be gathering shots for an article on bobcat habitats, her first solo assignment in years. But her hands trembled as she checked her camera and scanned the horizon, and the ache inside her chest was a silent wound that refused to close. There was no cell service here, not even the faintest signal. The nearest paved road was 12 miles away. Out here, it was only Claire, the wide open land, and whatever watched her from the shadows between the yucca and the low mesquite. She forced herself to move with purpose, unrolling her sleeping pad, flicking her headlamp on and off, setting a tiny camp stove to boil water for a cup of instant soup. She didn't want to admit how each task was less about comfort and more about pushing back the creeping loneliness, fighting the urge to crawl into her tent and pull the world in behind her like a shroud. When the first yowl rose up in the darkness, she nearly dropped her mug. It came from the east, a sharp, high-pitched cry, wild, mournful, and close enough to raise goosebumps along her arms. For a moment, she was 7 years old again, crouched under the porch at her grandparents' ranch, listening to the night animals, heart pounding with the thrill and terror of the unknown. Now the sound left her shaken. She switched off her headlamp and peered into the gloom, her senses straining for another sign, some confirmation that she was not truly alone. The yowling echoed again, followed by a chorus of more distant calls, raw, eerie voices tumbling through the grasslands. Coyotes, she thought at first. But no. The pitch was wrong, too feline, too sharp at the edges. Bobcats. Claire clutched her camera to her chest, torn between professional curiosity and the ancient animal instinct to huddle by the fire and pray for sunrise. She knew the rules. Respect the wild, keep your distance, never tempt fate. Yet in the darkness, her grief whispered that maybe, just maybe, something out there could break the dam that held back her sorrow. The wind picked up, rattling the canvas of her tent and whipping loose strands of her hair across her face. She crouched beside the embers of her tiny fire, staring at the dancing shadows that flickered across the walls of her tent. For a moment, she could almost convince herself that Mark was beside her, his presence as familiar as the beat of her own heart. She whispered his name into the night, the words snatched away by the wind. Time stretched and slowed. The moon rose, casting silver light across the grass, and the yowls faded into memory, replaced by the soft thrum of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Claire wrote a few lines in her battered leather journal, hands shaking as she tried to capture the feeling of being watched, not by any predator, but by the wilderness itself. There was a weight to the darkness here, a sense of being observed, tested, measured. She tried to sleep, but every creak of the grass, every rustle of wings overhead, snapped her awake. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, phantoms, memories, or maybe real creatures drawn by the scent of food and human presence. Once, just past midnight, she heard the unmistakable crunch of small paws circling her tent. She lay still, heart hammering, listening to the furtive exploration of some wild animal. Fox, coyote, or perhaps, impossibly, a bobcat itself. By the hour before dawn, Claire was shivering, her dreams restless and haunted by half-remembered grief. She wondered what she hoped to find out here. Was she searching for the perfect shot, a story to justify her solitude, or simply a sign that healing was still possible in a world that had changed beyond recognition? The line between fear and hope grew thin as the sky brightened in the east, painting the world in a ghostly blue. She rolled out of her tent, eyes gritty with exhaustion, and stared at the empty grasslands, every sound magnified in the hush of morning. But just as she knelt to relight her camp stove, she caught movement at the corner of her eye. A flash of tawny fur, a glint of green-gold eyes low to the ground. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. For a heartbeat, she was paralyzed, caught between excitement and primal dread. The wild was watching her, and this time it was not content to remain a distant echo. And so, as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the land, Claire Morgan faced the truth she'd been avoiding. Out here, she was no longer just an observer. In the company of loss, loneliness, and the restless spirits of the wild, she had crossed a threshold. She was part of the story now, for better or worse, and whatever happened next would be written not only in photographs, but in the beating of her own heart. The sun cracked the edge of the horizon, spilling molten gold across the sea of grass and painting everything in sharp relief. Claire's eyelids felt heavy with the residue of a broken night's sleep, but she forced herself upright, shivering as she unzipped her tent and breathed in the crisp, untamed morning. A coyote's distant yip chased the last dreams from her mind. She almost laughed at herself for letting the night scare her. In daylight, her old courage flickered stubbornly back to life. She poured water from her canteen, knelt to fill her battered kettle, and set it over the small camp stove. The world was still, almost expectant. As she waited for the water to boil, she noticed her backpack, left beside her camp chair the night before, had toppled over. The zipper was half open, one strap gnawed and frayed. She frowned, kneeling to inspect it. A few feet away, a shiny wrapper from her granola bar lay crumpled in the dust. She scanned the ground for more clues. Faint tracks, small and round, pressed into the soft earth. Not raccoon, not fox. Her heart quickened with the possibility. A sudden rustle behind her made her spin around, camera half raised by reflex. There, perched atop her overturned coffee mug, was a kitten, a bobcat kitten, small and wild-eyed, with enormous tufted ears and bold black stripes running down its legs. Its green-gold eyes met hers without a hint of fear. For a long moment, they stared at each other, frozen in a silent standoff. The kitten's fur was scruffy, dusted with last night's rain, and its belly looked round but not full. It flicked its stubby tail, hopped down, and started nosing through her gear, utterly unfazed by the towering human in its midst. Claire felt an involuntary laugh bubble up. "You little bandit," she whispered, voice husky with awe. "Aren't you brave?" She knew she should drive it away. Every wildlife photographer, every conservationist drilled the rules into her long ago. Never feed, never touch. Never teach a wild animal to trust humans. Still, as the kitten pawed at her protein bar and licked at the coffee mug's rim, a strange tenderness welled up in her chest. Something about its unguarded curiosity, The fearlessness of the very young tugged at the walls she'd built around her heart since Mark's death. The little bobcat paused, sitting back on its haunches. It tilted its head, studying her, ears twitching at every sound. Claire reached slowly into her jacket, pulled out a strip of beef jerky, hard, salty, pungent with the scent of pepper and smoke. "This is crazy," she muttered, half to herself, but she broke off a small piece and set it on the ground a few feet away. The kitten sniffed, eyes locked on hers, then darted forward in a blur of motion. It snatched the jerky, skittered back to a safe distance, and chewed with comical intensity. Claire sat perfectly still, every sense alive. She felt the electric thrill of connection, as if the land itself had offered her a fragile olive branch. In that moment, she wasn't a photographer or a scientist. She was just a human being, desperately needing something to care for and to be noticed in return. As the kitten ate, it kept glancing at her, as if deciding how much trust to risk. Claire kept her hands visible, her movements slow, whispering reassurances she knew it couldn't understand. She watched the wild little creature finish the jerky, and then, impossibly, approach for more, its tiny nose quivering in anticipation. She named him Scout on the spot, remembering how Mark used to joke that all the best adventurers were born nosy. "You're trouble," she said with a smile that felt strange on her face after so long, "but I like your style." Scout mewed, a sound somewhere between a purr and a challenge, and circled her boots as if to claim her for his own. For the next hour, Claire forgot her grief. She forgot the ache in her hands, the isolation of the prairie, even the pressure of her assignment. She simply watched Scout play, batting at a loose shoelace, pouncing on a moth, rolling in the dewy grass with kittenish abandon. She managed a few photographs, but mostly she just existed, present and awake in a way she hadn't been in months. The sound of yowling returned, sharper and nearer this time. Claire stiffened. Scout looked up, his ears flat, eyes wide. From the tall grass, a shadow flickered, large, quick, and gone before she could focus her camera. She caught her breath, heart pounding. Was it Scout's mother? A rival predator? The tension in the air was electric. Scout darted away, vanishing in the grass, as if he'd never been there at all. Claire sat motionless, every nerve humming. She waited, straining her ears for another sign. Her mind whirled. Had she crossed a line? Was the mother watching, judging, angry at her for tempting her cub with human food? The old fear and the new hope warred inside her. The prairie settled back into silence. A hawk circled overhead, screeching at the rising sun. Claire's hands trembled as she gathered her things, replaying every moment of her encounter. She told herself it would be a one-time thing. She would not feed them again, would not let her loneliness endanger wild lives. Yet beneath her worry, something bright and tentative flickered, like a spark in dry grass. Scout had looked at her, not with the caution of prey, but with the promise of something else. A connection, however fleeting. Claire wondered if healing might truly be possible after all, even out here at the ragged edge of the wild. But the grasslands kept their secrets, and as the day burned hotter, Claire knew nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the grasslands shimmered under a pale blue sky, the heat not yet risen to its full oppressive weight. Claire awoke with the feeling of being watched, that same electric sense she'd felt since she first set foot on this wild stretch of Arizona. Her hands, stiff from clutching her camera through the restless night, fumbled for her boots. Before she could even stand, a flicker of movement drew her eyes to the edge of camp. There, parting the grass like a little golden ship, Scout crept forward, his eyes bright with purpose and a dash of mischief. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, like a tiny, unruly parade, tumbled 4 more Bobcat kittens, each distinct in pattern and attitude, their fur bristling with the anticipation of the unknown. The sight was so unexpected, so impossibly lively, Claire nearly forgot to breathe. Scout, emboldened by yesterday's treat, trotted straight to her pack. The others hung back, hesitant, peering from behind a stand of blue grama. Claire sat very still, watching as one by one the new arrivals ventured closer, drawn by Scout's fearless example and the lingering scent of jerky. She let her camera rest in her lap, afraid that even the quiet click of the shutter might break the spell. The smallest kitten, a runt with a crooked ear, tripped over a twig and tumbled headfirst into a tangle of grass. Another, the boldest of the group, leapt onto a rock and swatted at a grasshopper, missing wildly but undeterred. Each had its own spirit, one cautious, slinking behind its siblings, another curious, sniffing at Claire's boots with twitching whiskers. Their eyes were the green gold of sunlight through leaves, alive with questions. Claire's heart ached in a way that was somehow both joyful and bittersweet. She realized, watching them, that she was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in what felt like years. The grief that had weighed her down since Mark's death did not vanish, but in this moment, it loosened its grip, replaced by something lighter. She dug into her journal, scribbling quick notes about their colors, their markings, their funny, clumsy grace. She named them as she observed. Pip, the runt with the crooked ear, always scrambling to keep up. Blaze, the bold grasshopper hunter with a blaze of white down her chest. Shadow, the shy one, keeping to the edges of the group. And Dottie, the smallest after Pip, her fur dotted with an almost comical abundance of spots. Scout, of course, remained the ringleader, darting in and out, always the first to investigate and the last to retreat. For a long while, Claire just watched them play. The kittens wrestled and pounced, chasing after moths and beetles, tumbling over one another with endless energy. Pip attempted to stalk a butterfly, only to sneeze at the last moment and send the whole group scattering in alarm. Blaze tackled Dottie, while Shadow tried to climb Claire's backpack, startled into retreat by the jingle of a zipper. Scout supervised, chirping encouragement and occasionally darting under the tent's flap as if daring his siblings to follow. From the tall grass, a low growl rolled across the clearing. The kittens froze. Claire, heart in her throat, followed their gaze. There she was, Queenie, the mother bobcat, muscular and wary, her powerful body tensed to either charge or flee. Her yellow eyes met Claire's with an intensity that left no doubt. These kittens were her world, and she would risk anything to keep them safe. Claire did not move. She kept her hands visible, her posture relaxed, silently willing Queenie to see she meant no harm. The mother bobcat sniffed the air, tail twitching. For a moment, time held its breath. Then, with a cautious step, Queenie melted back into the grass, never quite taking her eyes off Claire. The kittens, reassured by their mother's presence, resumed their antics, though with a little more wariness now. Claire finally dared to lift her camera, capturing 100 small moments. Pip leaping after a moth, Dottie rolling in the dust, Blaze squaring off with a grasshopper twice her size, Shadow peeking out from under the tent flap. Each click of the shutter felt like a gift, a fleeting chance to hold on to something wild and true. Claire poured herself a cup of instant coffee, savoring the rare peace. She thought of Mark and what he'd say if he could see her now. Maybe he'd laugh and shake his head, warning her not to get too attached. Or maybe he'd just smile, proud to see her finding joy again, even out here at the edge of the world. As the morning warmed, the kittens drifted away, following Queenie's low, rumbling calls. Claire watched them vanish into the tall grass, her heart swelling with both hope and anxiety. She didn't know if they would return, if this fragile bridge between worlds could hold. But in her journal, she wrote down every detail, every name, as if to anchor the magic of the morning before it slipped away. By noon, the camp was quiet again, but Claire no longer felt alone. She had new names, new memories, and, most important of all, a reason to hope. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart, and for the first time in months, it did not ache with emptiness. Instead, it was full of laughter, of wildness, and the fragile, fierce love that comes when you let yourself be surprised by the world. That afternoon, as clouds gathered on the horizon, Claire set out to explore the grasslands with fresh eyes. She knew the wild offered no guarantees. Danger, heartbreak, and separation always lurked nearby. But she also knew this. Sometimes, when you least expect it, the world answers your loneliness with a gift you never dared hope for. And that was enough to carry her forward into whatever tomorrow might bring. After the magic of the morning, Claire spent hours replaying every moment in her mind. Each tiny detail, the Bobcat Kitten's daring play, the pride and suspicion in Queenie's eyes, the way the wild grass trembled as the family slipped away, etched itself into her memory. When she developed her photos in her tent that afternoon, the images glowed with raw life. Each shot seemed to pulse with the untamed spirit of the prairie, every frame a fragile bridge between her world and theirs. But joy came with a price. That night, the wind rattled Claire's tent, carrying with it distant howls and the uneasy creak of mesquite. She found herself staring into the darkness, heart thrumming with hope and anxiety. Was she doing the right thing? She'd broken her rule. No feeding, no interference, no softening of the wild. Even as she resolved not to repeat her mistake, the longing for connection warred with her responsibility as a steward of the wild. At dawn, the prairie shimmered with dew, the air fragrant and electric. Claire set out her morning ritual, quietly boiling water for coffee, reviewing her camera gear, making careful notes in her journal. She didn't expect the kittens to return so soon, but then came the telltale sounds, the faint chirps and rustles, the soft thump of little bodies rolling through the grass. Scout emerged first, bold as ever, eyes glinting with mischief. Pip, Dottie, Blaze, and Shadow crept behind, more hesitant but clearly drawn to the strange human who'd become a fixture in their new world. This time, Claire resisted the urge to offer food. She watched, motionless, as the kittens explored her camp, sniffing at her boots, pouncing on the zipper of her backpack, tumbling across her sleeping mat. Pip rolled so close to Claire's hand that for a moment their eyes met, wild, uncertain, curious. Claire kept perfectly still, letting the kitten decide the distance. She heard a low growl, soft but unmistakable, and looked up to see Queenie watching from the edge of the clearing. The mother bobcat crouched half-hidden behind a bush, her body taut as a drawn bow. Claire understood. Queenie's trust was not yet given, only loaned. Any misstep could shatter it. For long minutes, a tense ritual unfolded. Queenie's eyes never left Claire, tracking every movement as the kittens played and explored. When Scout ventured too close to Claire's camp stove, Queenie issued a warning yowl. The kittens froze. Claire raised her hands, palms open, as if in silent apology. She waited, every muscle locked, willing her intentions to cross the gulf between them. "I won't hurt them," she whispered, barely audible above the morning breeze. "I promise." Gradually, Queenie's posture eased, her tail twitching less with anxiety and more with curiosity. She crept forward, close enough for Claire to see the flecks of gold in her fur and the small scar along her jaw. For a moment, Wild and human regarded one another, not as enemies, not quite as friends, but as two mothers, each with something precious to lose. The kittens grew bolder. Blaze attempted to stalk a lizard near Claire's boot. Dottie nosed a forgotten shoelace. Pip tumbled under the camp chair, vanishing from sight, only to reappear beside Scout, who chirped as if reporting his findings. Shadow, ever the observer, climbed atop a rock to survey the scene, his eyes flicking between Queenie and Claire. Claire lifted her camera with slow, careful hands, snapping photos that felt less like trophies and more like invitations, tiny glimpses into a world that had finally, hesitantly, allowed her to peek inside. With each click, she captured not just the kitten's antics, but the shifting currents of trust and caution that passed between them all. Yet, for all the joy, the boundary remained. Claire never reached out to touch. She never lured them closer with food or tricks. She respected their wildness as she respected her own grief, something untamed and deserving of dignity. The grasslands demanded humility, and she gave it freely, watching as the Bobcat family made her camp their playground, but not their home. That afternoon, the clouds built heavy and low over the horizon, hinting at the violence of summer storms to come. The wind grew restless, scattering leaves and rattling Claire's nerves. She packed away her gear with extra care, making certain no trace of food was left to tempt her wild companions. As she zipped her tent closed, she caught Queenie watching from the tall grass, her yellow eyes unreadable. Was it suspicion or approval? Was Claire's caution enough? That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the line between observer and participant. She remembered her late husband's words, spoken during their earliest trips into wild country. "You're not a part of the story unless you risk getting hurt." She wondered what he would say about her now, so careful, so desperate not to do harm, yet yearning for the healing that only connection brings. As the first fat drops of rain began to fall, Claire listened to the wild world just outside her thin shelter. She felt the nearness of the Bobcat family, imagined their warmth pressed together under a bush, Queenie's steady heartbeat anchoring her restless kittens. Claire pressed a hand to her own heart, feeling it drum with longing and fear and a strange, hard-won hope. If trust is a gift, she realized, it is also a risk, a leap across an invisible chasm. She had learned, at last, to respect the distance as much as the nearness. She drifted into uneasy sleep, uncertain what tomorrow would bring, but certain of one thing: to love the wild, you must let it remain wild. Only then could she and the Bobcats find the space to heal. A restless energy hung over the grasslands that afternoon, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. By mid-afternoon, thunderheads swelled in the western sky, stacking higher and darker with every passing minute. Claire felt the shift in the air, a heavy, metallic tension that set the hairs on her arms upright and made even the birds fall quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screeched and then vanished, as if heeding a warning the human world could only sense. Claire hurried through her usual preparations, tightening guy lines on her tent and stowing her camera gear inside the Jeep parked a few yards away. She checked her supplies twice, feeling the old instinct of the backcountry traveler take over. Nothing left out, nothing unsecured. The scent of ozone thickened. She watched Queenie and her kittens huddled beneath a stand of prickly pear at the far edge of camp. The mother bobcat's head was high, ears twitching, her body coiled and alert. Even the wild seemed to know that something big was coming. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, darkening the dust and turning the grass a shimmering, unnatural green. Lightning forked across the sky, thunder following so close behind that it rattled the tent poles. Claire crawled inside, hugging her knees, every muscle tensed as the wind screamed through the mesquite. Rain pounded the nylon above her in sheets. The world shrank to the small island of her tent, surrounded on all sides by the raging storm. In the confusion and noise, Claire could barely hear her own thoughts. Was the Bobcat family safe? Had Queenie found shelter for her kittens? Claire peered through the mesh window, but visibility was nothing but a flickering gray wall. The ground began to run with water, rivulets snaking through the grass, pooling in shallow dips and low spots. Claire shivered, teeth chattering with fear and cold, unable to block out memories of storms she'd weathered with Mark. He had always been the calm in the chaos, his steady hand guiding her through danger. Now she was alone, her courage tested in new and unfamiliar ways. Suddenly, between cracks of thunder, Claire heard a sharp, panicked yowl. She scrambled for her boots, adrenaline blotting out caution. The sound came again, high, frantic, too small to be Queenie. Claire's heart hammered in her chest as she grabbed her rain jacket and unzipped the tent, stepping into the chaos outside. The rain stung her face and soaked her clothes instantly, but she forced her way toward the cries, each step sinking into the mud. Through flashes of lightning, she spotted movement near a shallow wash that had turned into a rushing stream. Scout, Blaze, and Dottie clung together on a patch of high ground, their fur plastered to their bodies. Queenie circled them, yowling orders the kittens only half understood. But where was Pip? Claire scanned the floodwaters and saw, with a jolt of terror, the smallest bobcat struggling in the current, swept downstream by the force of the water. For a split second, Claire froze, every instinct screaming at her to stay back, to let nature take its course. But Pip's cries cut through the storm, raw, desperate, unbearably young. Something inside Claire broke loose. She hurled herself forward, boots splashing through the rising water, her hands outstretched as she scrambled down the slippery bank. The world narrowed to a single frantic moment. Claire's foot slipped on a stone and she went down hard, mud caking her jeans. But she clawed her way upright, driven by pure adrenaline. Pip's head bobbed above the water, tiny paws scrabbling for purchase. Claire lunged, one hand plunging into the icy flow. Her fingers closed around sodden fur just as Pip's strength failed. She pulled with all her might, fighting both the current and her own fear, until she had the kitten safe in her arms. Soaked and shaking, Claire staggered back up the bank, clutching Pip to her chest. The little bobcat was limp, his breath shallow, eyes barely open. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't you dare give up," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. She pressed him against her body, shielding him from the rain, her own warmth the only barrier between life and loss. She could barely feel her fingers, but she rubbed Pip's sides, willing the kitten's heart to beat strong. Thunder boomed overhead as Queenie and the remaining kittens watched from a distance, eyes wide with fear and hope. Claire knew she had crossed a line. She was no longer just an observer, but a participant in the wild drama of the grasslands. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Claire and Pip alone against the storm, hope flickering like the lightning above. The rain began to ease, the worst of the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived. Water still ran in rivulets across the camp, but the sense of panic faded. Pip stirred weakly, letting out a thin, plaintive mewl. Claire almost sobbed with relief. She carried him back toward the others, where Queenie paced anxiously. At first, the mother bobcat bristled, uncertain whether to trust or attack. Claire crouched low, arms extended, offering Pip back with all the humility and respect she could muster. Queenie inched forward, sniffed Pip, and then gently lifted the kitten by the scruff, her body relaxing as she carried her baby back to the shelter of the prickly pear. The kittens huddled close to their mother, Queenie's tail wrapped protectively around them. Claire slumped to her knees, overwhelmed with relief, exhaustion, and something close to awe. She had intervened, crossed the sacred boundary, but in doing so, she'd become forever part of this family's story. As the storm clouds broke and a weak sun struggled through, Claire realized the wild had changed her. The line between mercy and interference was never as clear as she'd believed. Sometimes, in the face of suffering, you had to choose compassion, even knowing the risks, even knowing the wild might never fully forgive. The storm left the grasslands washed clean and trembling, the land glistening with puddles that mirrored the bruised post-storm sky. The prairie, usually so full of invisible boundaries, felt smaller now, as if every living thing had huddled closer together during the onslaught. Claire crouched near her tent, rain-soaked clothes clinging to her skin, her hands trembling from more than just cold. Pip lay curled in her lap, shivering, his tiny body a frail bridge between the wild and the human world. For long minutes, Claire could do nothing but hold him, rubbing his sides with desperate, gentle strokes. She whispered encouragement, her voice hoarse from shouting into the storm. "Stay with me, little guy. You're tougher than this. I know you are." Her hands, usually steady behind a camera, were clumsy now, uncertain but fueled by an urgent hope. Pip's breath came in shallow gasps. His fur was matted and cold, his eyelids fluttering. Claire glanced toward Queenie, who paced just at the edge of the clearing, her eyes wild and unblinking, torn between the instinct to reclaim her kitten and the memory of Claire's hand in the rescue. It was a line that should never be crossed. Claire had been taught her entire career, let the wild be wild. Never interfere, even if it meant heartbreak. She'd given this advice to students and colleagues alike. Never touch, never feed, never become the story. But rules blurred when a life hung in the balance. As she gently wrapped Pip in a dry section of her jacket, warming him with her body heat, Claire realized she'd crossed not just a professional boundary, but something deeper and older inside herself. She remembered the last conversation she'd had with Mark, back when he was sick but still fighting. "Sometimes," he'd whispered from his hospital bed, "mercy matters more than rules. The line's not always so clear." His words echoed in her heart now, steadying her as she worked. Pip mewled weakly. Claire checked his paws. No sign of injury, only exhaustion and cold. She reached into her pack for a towel, cradling the kitten like a fragile treasure. The other bobcats watched from a safe distance, Queenie's tail lashing with anxiety. Claire risked a glance at the mother, then spoke softly, "He's okay. I'm just helping." Minutes ticked by. Claire rocked Pip gently, humming the lullaby she used to sing to her own son years ago, before time and tragedy split their family apart. It was a song of comfort, wordless but rich with old hope, and she felt the tension in Pip's little body slowly begin to ease. His breath grew steadier, his eyes fluttering open, dazed and unfocused but alive. For the first time since the flood swept him away, Claire allowed herself to believe he might survive. She didn't notice the tears until they fell, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. The flood of relief was dizzying. She was grateful the prairie was empty of witnesses. No camera, no editor, no stern supervisor to mark down the sin of mercy. It was just her and the wild, both changed by the storm. Finally, Pip let out a squeak and wobbled upright, his tiny legs trembling. He looked up at Claire with a confusion that bordered on trust, as if sensing she'd given him something beyond warmth. At the edge of the grass, Queenie inched forward, muscles taut, ready to spring if Claire showed any hint of threat. With deliberate slowness, Claire placed Pip on the ground between them, then backed away, palms open. Queenie rushed in, gathering Pip with a low, urgent growl. She sniffed him all over, checked him for injury, and then, satisfied, licked his fur in quick, rhythmic strokes. Pip mewled and pressed himself against his mother's belly, safe again in the only world he'd ever known. The other kittens huddled close, forming a living wall of reassurance and relief. Claire let herself collapse to the wet ground, her whole body shuddering with exhaustion. For a long moment, she watched the family, marveling at the fierce, silent love that held them together. She felt a pang of doubt. Had she done the right thing? Or had she set something in motion that couldn't be undone? As the sky cleared and shafts of sunlight broke through the clouds, the answer seemed less important than the act itself. In saving Pip, Claire had rediscovered a part of herself she'd feared lost forever. A willingness to risk heartache for the sake of kindness, to choose action over regret. The wild, she realized, was not a museum to be observed from a safe distance. It was a living, breathing world, as full of messy, complicated choices as her own life. That evening, as dusk crept over the drenched land, Claire documented the day in her journal. She wrote about the storm, the flood, the terror of losing Pip, and the desperate hope of saving him. She wrote about Queenie's eyes, about the unspoken agreement between two mothers on opposite sides of an ancient line. She wrote about Mark, whose voice she heard in every gust of wind. As the Bobcat family vanished into the grass, Claire felt a new bond, fragile, hard-won, and marked by the scars of what they'd endured. She knew the wild might never forgive her trespass, or perhaps, in some small way, it already had. She zipped her tent, crawled into her sleeping bag, and listened to the soft, reassuring sounds of the prairie. Wind in the grass, a distant chorus of crickets, the yowls of bobcats reunited after the storm. As sleep claimed her, Claire understood. Sometimes, breaking the rule was the only way to keep a promise to yourself and to the wild things that trust you, even for just a moment. The dawn after the storm arrived, hushed and trembling. The world washed clean, all the sharp edges blurred by the memory of wind and water. Claire awoke to a strange silence. No rain drumming the tent, no wild wind battering the walls. For a moment, she just lay still, listening to her own heartbeat and the cautious hope stirring within her chest. She wondered if the bobcats had survived the night, if Pip had recovered, or if their fragile truce had been broken by her act of interference. She feared she might have scared them away for good. She stepped out into the misty morning, her boots sinking in mud, the prairie around her glittering with dew. The sun crept up slowly, its light catching on every blade of grass, every droplet of water. She walked toward the old prickly pear where she'd last seen Queenie and her kittens, but found no trace. The only evidence of the night's chaos were paw prints pressed into the soft earth, a silent record of the family's ordeal. Claire spent the early hours tidying up her battered campsite and hanging her sodden clothes to dry. She made coffee, the steam curling like a promise into the air. She found herself pausing every few minutes, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, any glimpse of tawny fur among the shimmering grass. Her hands felt empty, her heart uneasy, as if waiting for a verdict she could not predict. She was so lost in her thoughts that she nearly missed the sound, a soft rustling, almost like the breeze but too deliberate, too close. She turned, heart leaping. There, emerging from the grass in the pale morning light, came Queenie. The bobcat mother moved with feline grace, her yellow eyes fixed on Claire, unreadable but unafraid. Behind her, the kittens followed in a loose, unruly procession. Scout, Blaze, Dottie, Shadow, and Pip, who seemed, to Claire's relief, just as feisty as ever, his fur clean and dry, his eyes bright. Claire knelt, careful to keep her posture non-threatening. Queenie regarded her in silence, her body language a strange mixture of pride and caution. Then, astonishingly, the bobcat dropped something at Claire's feet. A lizard, freshly caught, its tail still twitching. The gesture was unmistakable. Claire felt the world hold its breath. For a moment, neither moved. Then Queenie stepped back, allowing her kittens to surge forward, tumbling around Claire's boots, chirping and purring, unbothered by the human's presence. Blaze pounced at the lizard and wrestled it away. Scout gave chase, Dottie and Shadow followed. Even Pip joined, bounding and squealing as only the youngest can. Claire sat frozen, overwhelmed by the trust implied in Queenie's gift, the first, and perhaps only, true offering of peace between their worlds. The gift meant more than food. In the language of the wild, it was acceptance, respect, a bridge built with patience and risk. Claire blinked back tears, whispering a thank you that only the prairie could hear. She felt the boundaries she'd so carefully respected shift, still present, still sacred, but now softened by the possibility of mutual understanding. As the sun rose higher, the kittens played fearlessly around her, emboldened by their mother's presence and the unspoken alliance forged by the storm. Claire took photos, but this time she found herself less interested in the perfect shot and more in the experience itself. The warmth of fur brushing her boots, the rapid thrum of a kitten's heart, the wild joy of new life bouncing against the bones of old grief. She watched as Queenie settled a few yards away, her posture relaxed, her eyes half closed in trust. The kittens darted in and out, using Claire as an obstacle in their games, wrestling and chasing and rolling in the soft mud. Pip, still small but no longer fragile, clambered into Claire's lap and stared up at her with comical seriousness, as if trying to solve the puzzle of this strange, gentle giant who kept showing up in their lives. For a little while, time seemed to unravel. Claire wasn't sure how long she sat there, surrounded by kittens, lost in laughter and wonder. All she knew was that the heaviness in her chest was gone, replaced by a sense of belonging she'd thought was lost forever. She felt Mark's presence in the sunshine, in the laughter, in the beating of her own heart. She realized she was smiling, genuinely smiling, as the pain of loss mingled with a new, fierce gratitude for the world's second chances. The kittens tired themselves out and collapsed in a heap beside Queenie, their sides rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Queenie watched Claire, her eyes soft and knowing. The two mothers, one of flesh and blood, one of memories and dreams, shared a long look, neither needing words. When Claire finally rose to leave, she found herself changed. She understood, as the wild does, that trust is both a gift and a responsibility. The prairie would never be hers to claim, but for this moment at least, she belonged to it, and to the wild family that had chosen to accept her. She returned to camp lighter than she'd felt in years, her journal filling with new stories, her heart marked forever by a lizard laid gently at her feet. Summer in the grasslands unfurled in golden waves, each day bringing new warmth, new life, and the quiet certainty of change. Claire soon settled into a daily rhythm shaped by the wild family she had come to cherish. She rose before dawn, stepping quietly from her tent, camera slung over her shoulder and journal in hand, heart pounding with anticipation. She never knew what the day would bring. Sometimes the kittens would greet her at the edge of the clearing. Other times she'd glimpse only fleeting paw prints and the shimmer of movement among the tall grass. The bobcat kittens grew bolder with each passing week. Where once they had stuck close to Queenie's protective shadow, now they ventured further, testing their limits in the wide open world. Blaze, always the brave one, was first to wander beyond the safety of the camp. Claire watched with a mixture of pride and dread as the little bobcat stalked grasshoppers, attempted awkward pounces, and tumbled head over tail in a whirl of spotted fur. Scout soon followed, leading his siblings on reckless adventures, darting under fallen logs, climbing low branches, even sneaking up to Claire's jeep and batting at the dusty tires with curious paws. Pip, though still smaller than the others, made up for his size with stubborn determination. He shadowed his siblings on every expedition, never backing down from a challenge. Dottie and Shadow, too, became more confident, their personalities sharpening with each new experience. Shadow grew into a thoughtful observer, sometimes pausing for minutes at a time to study a beetle or the path of a butterfly before leaping back into the fray. Queenie watched it all with an air of careful pride, her yellow eyes never far from her kittens. Sometimes she joined in their play, swatting gently at a tail or herding them back from a prickly thicket. More often, though, she stood sentinel at a distance, allowing her brood the freedom to make mistakes, to learn, and sometimes to fail. Claire found herself relating to the mother bobcat more and more. The urge to protect, to hold on, battled with the knowledge that growing up meant letting go. Claire became more than a quiet observer. She was a witness to the wild's everyday triumphs and heartbreaks. She documented each milestone with reverence and awe. Blaze's first successful hunt, a trembling mouse, caught after a dozen failed attempts. Pip's bold swim through a shallow creek. Scout leading a midnight raid on a nest of crickets. The siblings giggling in their own way beneath the moon. Claire's journal filled with descriptions, sketches, and notes about the kittens' personalities. She gave each day a name, marking the passage of time with little triumphs and stumbles. Yet, beneath the wonder, a slow ache crept in. The kittens' explorations grew longer, their returns to camp less frequent. One evening, Claire waited for hours, her coffee growing cold, her camera untouched, scanning the horizon for any sign of her wild companions. Only the empty hush of the prairie answered. A coyote called from a distant ridge. The sun slipped below the horizon. Claire felt the familiar pulse of loneliness return, sharper now because of what she knew she would soon lose. Change arrived gradually, then all at once. One morning, she woke to find only Queenie and Blaze at the edge of camp. The other kittens had vanished into the tall grass, answering the wild's call with a certainty Claire envied and feared. She tried to reassure herself. This was what she'd hoped for, what she'd documented from the very start. Wild things belong to the wild. Yet her heart protested, mourning the loss before it was complete. In the following days, the absences became more frequent. Sometimes all the kittens would be gone, the clearing eerily still except for Queenie's silent vigil. Other times, Scout or Shadow would reappear for a few minutes, nuzzling Claire's boots or playing a quick game with Pip before melting away again. Claire tried to capture these moments with her camera, but she realized what she truly wanted could not be contained in any photograph. She wanted the assurance of connection, the daily comfort of laughter and chaos. Still, she found herself growing as well. She learned to find joy in the briefest encounters, to accept the sting of separation as proof of something real and valuable. She wrote about her conflicted emotions, the pride she felt at their independence, the sorrow in their absence, the gratitude for having witnessed their first clumsy steps toward adulthood. The grasslands themselves changed, too. The days grew shorter, the heat less oppressive. Grasses turned golden, and the wildflowers faded. Claire spent her evenings by the fire, reflecting on all she had witnessed. She thought of Mark, of the years they'd shared, and how his absence had once felt like a hole that could never be filled. Now, watching the Bobcat family grow and drift away, she understood something new. Love was not a possession, but a series of moments, freely given and let go. One late afternoon, as the wind carried the first hints of autumn, Claire saw all 5 kittens together one last time, clustered on a rocky outcropping beneath the setting sun. They seemed to sense the farewell in the air, gathering for a final playful brawl before slipping, one by one, into the tall grass that had always belonged to them. Claire raised her camera, but then lowered it again, choosing instead to simply watch, her eyes full of tears and gratitude. The Bobcat family had given her more than photographs or stories. They had given her a way back to herself, a reminder that to love deeply means to let go, again and again, with courage and with hope. As night fell, Claire closed her journal and sat in the silence, feeling the world's turning and the small, fierce joy of a heart that could finally hold both loss and possibility. Autumn descended on the Arizona grasslands in a slow, golden hush, the landscape painted with strokes of amber and rust. Each morning, Claire woke to a world transformed, dew diamonds glinting on the brittle stems of grass, the air sharp and clear, scented with the promise of change. The once constant chorus of crickets faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through the mesquite, and Claire felt the shift within herself as well, a bittersweet readiness she hadn't known she possessed. The Bobcat family became more elusive with every passing day. The kittens, nearly grown now, appeared less and less, their once clumsy tumbles replaced by the purposeful, stealthy movements of true hunters. Claire's heart ached with pride and sorrow as she watched their final lessons unfold under Queenie's stern eye. Blaze mastered the silent stalk. Scout led his siblings through a tangled arroyo with effortless confidence. Shadow vanished for hours on end, only to return with the scent of adventure clinging to his fur. Dottie and Pip, no longer the smallest, sparred with mock ferocity, learning to fend for themselves in a world that would never coddle them. Each departure felt more final. Claire spent her days roaming the grasslands, camera in hand, capturing whatever moments the wild allowed. Some days she caught only glimpses, a spotted tail slipping behind a boulder, the flicker of an ear among the golden grass. Other days, she sat for hours beside her dying campfire, waiting for a sign that her wild friends remembered her. When a bobcat appeared at dusk, pausing just within the circle of firelight, it was a gift, a silent farewell that left Claire both grateful and aching. One afternoon, she watched Queenie gather her family at the edge of the ridge where the land sloped away into shadow. The kittens clustered close, tense with anticipation, their bodies sleek and strong. Claire knew, without being told, that this was the last lesson, the final migration before the bobcats scattered, each to claim a piece of the vast wild for themselves. Queenie touched noses with each of her young, her tail looping around them one by one. Then, with a final, commanding yowl, she led them up the ridge and out of sight. Claire felt hollow in the silence that followed, the weight of goodbye settling over her like the falling leaves. She gathered her things slowly, packing away her camera, her journal, the battered mug Mark had given her so many years ago. She moved through camp in a trance, every gesture infused with memory. She was no longer the woman who'd arrived here, haunted by loss, terrified of her own vulnerability. She was someone who had loved fiercely and let go, who had risked her heart for the sake of something wild and precious. That night, as she sat beside her last campfire, Claire allowed herself to grieve. She thought of Mark, of their years together, of laughter echoing across empty canyons, of quiet moments shared under starlit skies. She felt the pain of his absence, raw and honest, but she also felt a new gratitude for the love that had shaped her, for the wild family that had healed her in unexpected ways. She wrote late into the night, pouring her thoughts onto the page. She wrote about courage, the kind it takes to care, even when you know loss is inevitable. She wrote about boundaries and how they both protect and limit us. She wrote about the beauty of connection, the risk of heartbreak, and the wisdom that comes from honoring the wildness in others and in oneself. For the first time, her words did not come from loneliness, but from acceptance. She realized that true love, whether for a person or a bobcat, is measured not by how tightly we cling, but by how bravely we let go. As the fire dwindled to embers, Claire looked up at the vast, star-pricked sky. The grasslands seemed to breathe around her, alive with the memory of laughter and struggle and wild, improbable hope. She pressed her palm to the earth, feeling its steady, unhurried heartbeat. She remembered what Mark once said: "Healing doesn't erase the scars, but it gives you room for new stories." She understood now, in her bones, that every act of kindness, every risk, every boundary crossed in mercy, left a mark that rippled far beyond what she could see. The bobcats would move on, carrying traces of her with them into the wild unknown. She, too, would carry them forward, not as wounds, but as gifts, proof that it was possible to love again, to be changed by the world, and to change it in turn. When the sun rose the next morning, painting the prairie with light, Claire packed her things for the last time. She paused at the edge of the clearing, her footprints mingling with the faint tracks of bobcat paws. She whispered a goodbye, simple, honest, and full of gratitude, knowing it was not the end, but a continuation. The wild had taught her that every goodbye holds the seeds of a new beginning. As she drove away, the grasslands faded in her rearview mirror, but the lessons endured. She no longer needed to possess the wild to be a part of it. She had learned the grace of letting go, and in doing so she had found her way back to herself. Back in her quiet home on the edge of town, the Arizona grasslands felt like another world, distant, mythic, and stitched into the lining of Claire's heart. The autumn wind rattled her porch windows, bringing scents of dry earth and memory. She'd left the wild behind, but she carried its echo with her in every breath, every glance at the photographs she'd brought home. The first morning after returning, Claire brewed her coffee and stood at the window, staring into the pre-dawn darkness. She half expected to see a bobcat slip through her yard, its eyes reflecting secrets only the wild knew. Instead, she saw only the gentle sway of the neighbor's cottonwood tree and a flock of sparrows gathering in the grass. She felt the familiar ache of absence, but this time it was gentled by gratitude, a soft ache that did not demand to be filled. She set to work with her photographs, spreading them across her kitchen table in rivers of color and light. There were hundreds, kittens tumbling in the grass, Queenie poised on a sunlit rock, Pip's small form pressed to her chest after the flood. Each image was a portal, a moment captured, a lesson learned. Claire carefully selected the best, arranging them into a story for her local community center. Echoes in the grasslands, a wild family's tale. The display drew visitors for weeks. People lingered before the photos, asking questions, marveling at the beauty of the untamed world just beyond the edges of town. But it was the stories behind the pictures that lingered. At each event, Claire spoke softly but with conviction about the wild's fragile trust and the risks and rewards of kindness. She described the line she'd crossed to save Pip, the gift of the lizard from Queenie, the long, slow letting go that marked the end of summer. Her audience listened in rapt silence, some blinking away tears, others scribbling notes, all of them changed by the tale of connection and compassion. Yet, what endured most for Claire was not what the world could see, but what she now felt inside herself. She found a new ritual in the quiet of her evenings, lighting a candle on her porch and sitting with the night, open to whatever blessings or losses might arrive. Sometimes, as dusk deepened and the world grew still, she fancied she heard a bobcat's yowl echoing in the distance, or glimpsed paw prints in the dust by her steps. She no longer waited in longing or grief. Instead, she kept her heart ready for wonder and surprise. In the months that followed, Claire's sense of connection to the wild deepened. She volunteered with local conservation groups, sharing her images and insights with children and adults alike. She taught workshops on ethical wildlife photography, always emphasizing respect for boundaries, the wildness in every living thing. Her story became a quiet beacon in her community, proof that ordinary lives could intersect with the extraordinary if only one had the courage to reach out, to risk, to care. She came to realize that true connection honored both freedom and intimacy. The wild was never hers to keep, only to witness, to protect, and sometimes to let go. She saw her own journey reflected in the bobcat families, each of them shaped by love, tested by loss, and forever changed by acts of trust. Claire stopped trying to erase her scars. Instead, she wore them as reminders of the grace that comes from caring, even when the outcome is uncertain. One evening, after a gentle winter rain, Claire wandered into her backyard, drawn by an unshakable feeling. The moon hung low and bright, casting a silvery sheen over the grass. There, near the fence line, she found a set of small, unmistakable paw prints, fresh, impossibly delicate, already fading in the soft earth. Her breath caught. She knelt, touching the tracks with trembling fingers. Were they left by a stray passing through? Or had the wild sent a messenger, a reminder that every genuine connection leaves its mark long after the world has turned? She didn't need an answer. What mattered was the knowledge that she was open again, open to joy and to heartbreak, to the wild's unpredictable gifts and the risks that come with loving anything deeply. She had learned that healing was not about erasing loss, but about weaving it into the fabric of life, letting it make room for new stories, new bonds. As winter deepened, Claire found herself at peace with uncertainty. She no longer measured her days by absence, but by the quiet hope that kindness, once given, ripples outward forever. Sometimes, in the blue hush before dawn, she whispered a blessing for Queenie and her grown kittens, wherever the wild had taken them. She trusted they carried something of her, a memory, a lesson, a spark of compassion, into the hidden corners of the grasslands. Her porch light burned every night, a gentle beacon against the dark. Claire understood at last that letting go was not an ending, but a renewal, a way of honoring the wild in others and in herself. The photographs on her wall, the stories in her heart, and the soft echo of wild yowls in her dreams all testified to a simple, powerful truth. Acts of compassion, no matter how fleeting, change the world and ourselves in ways we may never fully know. And so, as the seasons turned and new footprints appeared in unexpected places, Claire's heart remained open, resilient, and forever shaped by the legacy of the wild.